Hello, everyone. Good night. I hope all of you is healthy, and thank you for joining us for this PES webinar series organized by IEEE PES Turkey Chapter in coordination with IEEE PES Turkey Student Branch. Tonight we have our good friend Dr. Shay Bahramirad as our guest, and we are very honored to meet her, albeit electronically. I hope that we could meet her physically, but next time I hope that we will be meeting her in physical conditions. And okay, I will give longer words about dear Shay, but first of all, I would like to say that as the PES board member, Shay is also giving so much helps to our region, for the development of our region about the PES activities, so that in the future times, I hope that she will be helping us. She will be helping PES in greater levels, because as far as I know, she is also running she will be joining a competition about being the number one of PES, global PES, so that I hope that we will see her in greater positions to help our region about developing the PES activities. And okay, I can time to give some.
Hello, everyone. I would like to give more information about our guest. Shay Bahramirad is the Vice President of Climate and Resilience at Quanta Technology. She is responsible for assisting cities and utilities with climate change risk assessments for their assets, operations, and services, and for developing mitigation strategies and investment strategies for adapting to climate change. Dr. Bahramirad has held several positions in the energy sector, including Vice President of Engineering and Smart Grid at Comet, the electric utility in Illinois. In these roles, she has overseen and/or executed grid of the future visions, technical roadmaps, analytical frameworks, and investment strategies of distribution system and communication network, fiber of over $4 billion. She has also been responsible for system reliability, DER integration, grid strategy and analytics, standards, maintenance inspection, emerging technologies, steam programming, and reimagining the power grid to mitigate and adapt to climate change. She has also developed talent strategies, in industry engagement plans, and advocacy programs to support business objectives. She has been the expert witness and testified on several state and federal regulatory proceedings around microgrids, energy storage, investment strategies, and distributed generation interconnection 1547. Dr. Bahramirad is an editorial board member of the Electricity Journal, USC executive member, an adjunct professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and the IEEE PES Vice President of New Initiatives and Outreach, overseeing the organization's engagement with policymakers globally around technical issues, investment strategies, emerging technologies, and developing plans for the next generation of frameworks, including smart cities and clean energy, and running the philanthropy activities of IEEE PES Smart Village. She is the contributor to the United Nations SG7, Affordable and Clean Energy. And now, Professor, if you are ready, we will leave the floor to you.
Shay, it's our pleasure to host you tonight, and Shay will be with us with the topic climate and resilience planning. Shay, whenever you are ready, we can start the session.
Thank you. Merhaba, and thank you so much for having me. As I was sharing with Professor, Turkey is one of my favorite places to visit, and I've been to Istanbul several times, and I love going to Blue Mosque and Topkapi and Grand Bazaar and Spice Bazaar. There is so much history and so much culture, the place of the world that you are at. I look forward to working with you a lot closer in the future, and expanding the PES activities a lot more than it is to Turkey. I attended ISGT Europe in Turkey when it was a couple of years ago, and again, I look forward to joining you back in person anytime soon. Let me share my screen with you. Please let me know if you cannot see it. What I would like to talk about is the climate change and the impact of climate change into our business, electric power system, and resilience planning of electric power system. Then I would love to take any questions that you would like to have about my plans related to PES. PES, generally speaking, as I'm serving on the board as the VP of New Initiative and Outreach, or anything related to the courses that I teach at Illinois Tech, or the work that I do with quanta technology. But starting with climate change, what I have here is that the global phenomena of climate change and the fact that it impacts our business globally, but it shows itself, it manifests itself locally. This is what you see on the top is the satellite view of the ice in north of the planet, and how it impacts potentially in different parts of the world, in California with the fire, and the fact that since 1961 to 2019 is the chart that you see here, that the heat wave, the intensity of it, the frequency of it, and the duration of it is increasing significantly. That would make an impact in different ways. If you have an underground system, combination of rain and heat is going to increase the faults. If the heat wave and the heat frequency and duration changes, the size of the distribution transformers would change. It changes the way that the loading of the system, both on the emergency and during a blue sky day, is defined. It impacts components and it impacts the system, and that's something that needs to be revisited. What I'm trying to explain or show here is that this is the map of the United States and how the climate change has impacted only in 2020, last year, the billions of dollars that the weather and the climate disaster impacted our energy sector. I mentioned fires in California, fire and flood in Colorado. The number of hurricane that has happened in Florida and in south of the state. These days, I work quite a lot with Puerto Rico. Hurricane Maria happened and it wiped the entire, and there were people that they didn't have power for 8 months or so after that earthquake happened. And the number of these events that are happening, the severity of it is increasing, and the duration of it is increasing, and the frequency of it is increasing. I've been in Chicago. I've been living in Chicago for the past 15 years, and I worked in the electric utility for 8 years. And what I can share with you is that few examples. Last year, we had a number of tornadoes that they touched down in Chicago, and hundreds of thousands of people were out of power. That's something that we didn't have it for 20-something years. The Chicago River flooded, and that flood got into a substation that is in the basement of a Sears Tower, one of the most iconic buildings in the country. And the substation got disconnected, and the entire tower didn't have power for 1 week. It impacted the news and media. It impacted the flights, since they couldn't fly over the city of Chicago. So I can just go on and give you examples about these things that you see here in this map, and the billions of dollars that impacted our electricity sector. FEMA is a federal emergency management agency, and they look into across industries. It's not only related to energy. What they do is, during disaster, they look into how different sectors are connected and how impact each other, and they provide funding. For instance, in Puerto Rico that I worked with, these days they have been investing billions of dollars in order to build an infrastructure that is more resilient. The way they look at the community lifeline during disaster. And when you think about it, they are very much connected and intertwined, between food and water and shelter, to safety and security, the energy sector, the power grid, and both on the generation side and on the delivery side, the medical sector that is completely dependent on electricity sector, the communication infrastructure related to alerts and warning messages, 911 center, and transportation sector, the places that in mass transit or railway or marine, the way that the emergency support needs to get into different places. And if you think about all of it, the electric power grid is in the middle of that, all the community lifelines. So this is the reason that the resilience of the electricity sector, which is the backbone of all infrastructure, is extremely important anywhere around the world. So think about that now with a lot of decisions and the way that we human have lived our life, and the way that we have operated different industries, we have this problem of climate change that is impacting our business and the way that the grid is built and is operated. So there are two things that we have to think about. One is, what can we do in order to reduce the severity and the frequency and duration of these events? That's adaptation. So how can we be proactive in order to reduce that speed? The second part is, the number of weather-related events is increasing. We see the number of hurricanes and flooding, and it manifests itself differently. What do we need to do in order to mitigate that impact? So one, adaptation is, what can we do proactively to reduce that? The second one is mitigation. What can we do in order to live with the fact that this is our new normal? So few things related to decarbonization of the grid. One, as comes to everyone's mind, is electrification and integration of renewable energy. How can we shift fuel from fossil fuel and reduce the carbon footprint into more into renewable energy? And how can we electrify the most important sector, which is the transportation, that creates the largest carbon footprint around the world? What are the methods in order to reduce that carbon footprint? How can we increase energy efficiency and demand response in a way that during the time that renewable energy is available, either wind or solar, and shift the demand in order not to be in need of generation peakers that in most cases they have a large carbon footprint, like T-cell generation. And then in going back to the fact that technology leads, but at the end of the day, policy rules. What type of policies and incentives or penalties we need in order to encourage installation of renewable, encourage this shift of demand from during the peak hour to the time of the day that either generation is not as needed as much, or it's available too much, for us to reduce the need for polluted type generation like coal or other types. So now moving to adaptation, the fact that these hazards are part of our day-to-day lives. This is the new normal. What do we need to do in order to adapt the system? What changes do we need to make in the system from design perspective, from equipment decision-making, and to operation and processes to keep the lights on, and as you saw, that electric power grid as the core and center of the lifeline of all communities. And then there are other things that they are man-made. It's not only about climate change, but this is the new normal in our lives these days, like a cyber or physical security, or the aging infrastructure and the equipment tripping, and how do we rack and stack all of these in order to design the system? So adaptation through resilience planning. There is not an industry-wide way to define resiliency, but the way that we can all agree is that there's a difference between reliability and resiliency. Reliability events, there are the ones that the frequency of the probability of happening is high, but the consequences are low. Like about 70% of the distribution system events used to be reliability events. There are the faults that they get cleared, tens of thousands of them, they get cleared in distribution control center every year. But on the other side, the resiliency are the ones that the probability of happening is small. Historically, it used to be small, but the consequences are too large. When we say, for example, the probability of 16 tornadoes touching down in Chicago 10 years ago was very small, but we had one last year. The probability of flooding of substation Sears Tower was very small, but it did happen last year. So that's the part that we need to plan for it. So what does it mean? The definition of resilience, the way that IEEE technical report of PES TR 65, which is very much in line with FEMA's, is the ability to withstand and reduce the magnitude or the duration of disruptive events, which includes the capability to anticipate, absorb, adapt, and fast recover from such events. So basically, it goes back to two components. One is that avoid outages. What can we do to design and operate the system, to electric power system, to avoid outages? Second, the system is bound to laws of physics. Things happen to it, either overhead or underground or any type of generation. Then what can we do in order to recover as fast as we can to normal condition? These are the two things that are the two components of resilience planning. There is not an industry metrics associated with resiliency, but I do believe that it's not similar to SAFE or KD or MEFI, that it's easy to define resiliency. There should be guidelines related to resilience metrics, but it's that global phenomena that manifests itself, that the things that you do for fire protection is different than the one that you do for flood, or the ones that you do for hurricane or for tornado. So those guidelines are missing, and I'm going to talk about it a bit later. But what I'm showing you here is that how we develop or scope resilience. First of all, now we agreed on what it means and the different components of it. The first step is to look into identify the problems or the vulnerabilities or the impact of the climate. First, the forecast. What's the impact in that local area that we are looking at? The second step is what's the implication? How does it show itself? What is its relevance to the age of the system in that local area, both from a system standpoint and from a component or asset management? Then getting into other elements such as physical and cybersecurity, and then looking into staffing and the interdependency between telecommunication and gas and water and IT infrastructure. And based on that, putting a plan how to mitigate that. What I'm showing you here is a European Environment Agency, that the focus, I showed you what's going on in the US and the billions of dollars that is getting spent every year in infrastructure related to impact of climate. Now, what I'm showing you here is what is going on in the example of case studies across Europe, and the strategies that in different countries, for example, in France or in United Kingdom, in Iceland or Finland and Sweden, they are looking into these case studies and adapting overhead lines to increase temperatures or improving resilience of biomass fuel supply chain. That's a big initiative in United Kingdom. There is a flood risk that in France have been looking into how they can manage it, and around like hydropower plants. In Iceland, expansion of hydropower because of the glacier is melting, and in Finland, because of the lots of weather-related issues, they're replacing overhead lines with underground cable. I talked a little bit about the definition of resilience and the fact that the universal one-size-fits-all of reliability doesn't apply to resilience. Resilience framework and process addressing all hazard events goes into few steps: identifying relevant parameters, applying those priority weighting in a risk modeling tools, and looking into probabilistic way of risk assessment for investment decisions and resilience deployment, and measuring the full spectrum of direct and indirect measures. The report that you see here, I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's free in IEEE Resource Center, accessible for everybody. That's a work that I led with a group of experts globally around resilience framework methods and metrics for electricity sector. It's a very good report that gets into some of these issues. I have included the link in the presentation, and you can certainly access it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to have a conversation about it. Then the next step associated with the work on the IEEE is I'm working with a group of volunteers to create a task force around climate change and how it impacts, how grid modernization is an extremely important part of mitigating and adapting to climate change. If there is anybody in the audience who would like to be part of that task force, feel free to send me a note. My email address is available on the PES website, and I'm happy to share with you. I would like to end the presentation with one thing, and that's the fact that historically we have planned and engineered the electric power system only looking at the system. Very rarely we have included the component of people and human. The human factor hasn't been part of our planning the system. And the part that I think we are at a point to include in our planning, both our investment planning and our system planning, is community resilience. Just because of the impact and the devastation of these events that are impacting different communities. Community resilience is distributed across sectors and domains. I went through some of those, such as hospitals, water, gas, telecommunication, and food and agriculture. So it cuts across a lot of different lifelines of communities, and each has direct control over some aspect with cascading impact and influence on other facets of resilience. The most direct control of utilities is in the built environment, but is also linked to other areas such as social, health and governance, and environmental justice. There are ways to incorporate the data collected at the community level into probabilistic method and planning the system for resiliency and adaptation and mitigation of impact of climate. That's all I had, and thank you so much for listening to me. I would, as I mentioned, I would be happy to take any questions related to the presentation that I made, or any questions that you might have related to my plans for PES.
Thank you, Professor. It was a very nice presentation, and we are glad to have all this information on this very important issue. And also it's very good to see that we are receiving some questions from the audience, and probably, yes, as you can also see on the screen, the first question, which comes from Ayşe, is what can be the role of electric vehicles via V2G mode, vehicle to grid mode, mobile energy storage systems, and mobile generators to increase system resiliency during adverse conditions?
So, Aisha, that's a very interesting and very important and timely question. So I start with an electric vehicle, and I would get all the way to V2G model and how the benefit that it provides to the grid is important. First of all, as I mentioned, the most sector that produces carbon is transportation sector. In order to reduce the carbon footprint is increasing electric vehicle. That's the electrification of transportation, not only for EVs, but for school buses and fleet and trucks and that type of, even at large scale. Then you asked about V2G model. A Tesla of Model S has a battery of 70 to 85 kilowatt hour. So that's a battery that is available. So if there is a model if there is an incentive for people to adopt, now think about that school buses and trucks, they have a larger battery. So it is very important to, first of all, start with adaptation of and increasing and encouraging the number of electric vehicles in the system. At the same time, doing a lot of studies and R&D and pilot and prototype to see how those batteries and on the V2G mode, they can contribute as a resource during any kind of event in the system, or reduction of the load during the peak.
Thank you. And the second question, which is from Jihan, what are the critical and initial steps for governments to increase power system resiliency? So,
number of things. There is a around the world, there are different ways that electric utilities are making investment in the system. On the delivery side, there are rate recovery mechanisms that the government or the regulators are look into the investments that utilities have made, and they make a decision if it's been prudent, so they can get return on it. The investments associated to resilience is something that needs to be recognized by regulators, policymakers, legislators, and the governments around the world. That's number one. Number two is that there are a number of oversight organizations that make both independent system operators or regulators to plan for catastrophic events. Let me give you an example of Texas, what happened in Texas. Texas was hit by a severe storm and below freezing temperature in the week of February 13th. Temperature dropped far below average, and after the demand hit a winter high record, grid operator issued control power outage to avoid long-term damage. Then they started rolling blackouts, which left more than 4.5 million Texas homes and businesses without power. So natural gas, coal, nuclear plants, which provide the majority of power in the winter in Texas, went offline, and wind turbines froze, and natural was hit the hardest in Texas. About 30 gigawatt of thermal plants became unavailable. So all to this point, it was like facts. The way that they have planned the system historically, in its worst case extreme winter analysis, the market operator expected a loss of 14 gigawatt of thermal resource. So they planned for 14 gigawatt of loss of generation, but they were hit by 30 gigawatt. So does that mean that what's the role of the government? Government needs to, or the regulators or the policymaker need to make planning for these events that we see it more and more with more severity, more frequency, and with longer duration as part of the planning of the system, both for the delivery side and the generation side.
Thank you. So everyone should work together. And the next question from Alper is, what's the impact of common energy storage systems in improving resilience in microgrids? Somewhat technical question.
Yeah, so I worked on the first cluster microgrid for 7 years as part of my work at ComEd. It was the first cluster microgrid in the country. And energy storage, a battery and solar, we designed it and operated in an optimal way to be utilized as dispatchable generation. It required a number of different things from the system design, from communication infrastructure. We had to do a lot of analysis to come up with visibility of the system that is needed in order to utilize that. So energy storage on a localized grid, on a localized generation and control and usage of power, which is a microgrid, is very important. However, if I think that there is a big opportunity for energy storage to improve the technology to have a more predominant role as part of resiliency of the system. The seasonal, whenever a seasonal type of storage similar to hydro is available, it's the time that it becomes a lot more as part of the planning for the resiliency. But in a smaller scale of in microgrid, energy storage plays a significant role. The microgrid that I worked on, it's a 7 megawatt microgrid with 1,100 customers. So the higher you go, and then the diversity of fuel is extremely important. So for a 4-hour, 2 megawatt for 4-hour type energy storage, it comes with, you know, its own limitations that needs to be compromised either with different types of resources. That in that case, that resource for us was natural gas.
Thank you. The other question is from Merchan. Can you provide more information on resiliency metrics used for comparisons between the events? I think in one of your slides you mentioned about some resiliency metrics between the nations, between the events.
So the metrics that I mentioned, there are like two components. Was how much we are avoiding outages, and if the outage happens, how fast we are recovering. Then it's a consequence-based metrics. You look into what was the impact, what was the consequence of it, how fast we recovered, and in between, it's like how many outages we avoided. It's the guideline of it. You can find it in the framework, high-level framework. You can find it in the IEEE report. That perhaps I can put the link in the chat box.
Okay, thank you.
Can people see the chat box?
Yes.
You can download the link from IEEE Resource Center. And then I put my email address that if you want to talk in more details about how you modify it.
Now you wrote on the private chat, but we can share this link with the audience, with the participants, no problem.
Oh, can you do that? I don't know how to put it on the.
No problem. We can share. We can share after the presentation, after the event.
Okay. Yeah, I don't.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. And for the next question, as far as I saw, the next question and even the next one are about the PES activities. So, as a very active PES member, Alena, do you want to read the question?
Okay. Thank you, Professor. What do you plan for the more activity enrollment of students in PES activities?
So if I get elected, my plan is to, first of all, increase international member participation by enhancing PES awareness and enhancing student participation at international meetings to foster greater global cooperation. The other thing that is extremely important to me is increasing recognition of PES volunteers, especially students and young professionals, by acknowledging their contributions personally and with their universities and employers, and promoting programs to engage and energize student members and young professionals of all grades with tutorial and workshops and mentoring and networking opportunities.
Thank you.
Alena, please.
Okay, in the current situation, what are the shortcomings of PES in terms of global and students?
That's an excellent question, and I appreciate the challenge. I think we have been trying very hard. The PES has been trying hard to have conferences, and but majority of them, we've taken a number of steps, but I would believe that that's not enough. There's a lot that needs to be done. The shortcomings on having conferences and participation of both industry and academia in from all regions in international. Student chapters are very active, but in order to take advantage of those active participation and getting them into leadership positions in PES, that's something that needs a lot of work. Making sure that a lot of volunteers are doing a lot of work. They get and they connected to technical council. They get connected to PES publications. They are part of a conference plannings. The young professional and women in power. There are a number of workshops locally happening, but there is a lot more opportunity to connect the experts globally and get the conversation going across the globe. And I look forward to work with you and count on your support and your help to make that happen.
We will make it happen, Shay.
Another question.
I can come in for asking one question.
Yes, please.
Of course.
Especially in our region, many activities are handled in a more voluntary way. Can PES lead more economic possibility for student activities to have higher quality activities to compete with other regions in the world? I think they are needing some. Okay, this is a voluntary activity, that's sure. But at least how much money you have, the level at least can be increased. The quality of the activities can be increased. It depends on the money, and different regions of the world needs different things. Can PES have more economic support for the PES students, especially to handle at least better issues?
So let me tell you something. This is not a very known fact. There is a reserve money at IEEE PES that through conferences and membership, it's a pot of money. And if there is theoretically or ideally, there should be a very strong connection between PES board and different chapters around the world, and to identify champions, to ask for initiatives and put proposals together. There are guidelines to do it. But if my plan is to find champions locally at different part of the world, and those champions put proposals together for different initiatives and get funding for those regions for different activities. There is a big challenge for the PES to come up, what is the next round of initiatives that would take the PES to the next level? It's a big question that has been unsolved. And that's something that it can be either student activity, it can be initiative, it can be competition. you know, if you think about it, the foundation of our industry was built on entrepreneurs like Edison and Westinghouse, and IEEE at a larger level it supports entrepreneurship, but we don't have it very much at PES level. And I would love to work and create entrepreneurship programs to first of all take the expertise and share the expertise, at the same time working into ideas and putting plans and requests together to get funding from PES to make it happen.
Thank you very much. And the other question is another technical question. Alena, please let me read. Considering the last developments, do you think countries give more importance to the efforts to find solutions to live with the problems related to climate change or to prevent it?
I would think so. Think about what we learned during this pandemic. So it's been crazy. It's been so surreal for the past 2 years, what's been going on around the world. But I take two good things out of this. Number one is that the human interaction, like being on the Zoom and talking on the Zoom, or going to school and universities and e-learning, all of it gets enabled by our industry. So we are at the forefront of anything that is going on. We are way more important than anything else, like any other industry, I would say. During this time, that's what we learned from this pandemic. The second thing is that if you look at the pollution associated with traffic, about planes and ships and transportation, it's way lower than any time else. Look at all these National Geographic and NASA and lots of other organizations that they publish. So the pollution has been reduced. That means that there are ways for us to reduce the carbon footprint. It's doable. So it goes back to the adaptation and mitigation of climate change. We can think about reducing the traffic and reducing the carbon footprint. So I would say, yes, we have learned a lot in the past 2 years because of pandemic. But on the bright side, I'm an optimist, by heart. There are lots of things that we can monetize from those learnings. Many utilities, if they wanted to go into like digitization, it would have taken like a decade to look into risks and assessment and infrastructure. But in 48 hours, many utilities, 60% of their employees started working from home. That's an amazing phenomenon that we can monetize on it and build on it.
We would never think about it before. We couldn't imagine that we could do it.
Yes, exactly. I never thought that I would be able to teach my students or go to law school in like on Zoom.
I think people started to like to again turn back to the technical issues. If they found
you want to ask the last one?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. The integration of demand response problems for grid resilience is widely investigated methodology in the literature. What are the main requirements for these types of implementation?
So somewhere in my presentation, I talked about that technology leads, but policy rules. It needs to be incentives to encourage people to reduce their demand when it's needed. When that financial mechanism doesn't exist, then what's the reason for me to reduce my demand?
Sure.
When something happens. So it goes back to that regulation. It goes back to those incentives that either comes from policymakers or the government. So people and customers can participate in that interaction.
Really think about that, Shay. Just as an addition, if there's an imagine, and I hope that will not be, but imagine there's an earthquake. That's a disaster. Really, would the system operator be able to handle at the same time the issues of recovering the system back and also trying to lower some demand from some sites? Would really the system operator give importance to my load?
It really depends on the sophistication of the systems. You know, I'm working in Puerto Rico right now, as I mentioned, and after hurricane and after earthquake, the capability doesn't really exist. They don't have a OMS system, the simple outage management system that can control. So the capability for that doesn't exist. But if you have advanced distribution management system, and earthquake has been part of the resilience planning, I would say, then yes, it's doable.
No, that's fine. I hope that we will see those things also more in life. Really, the devil saved the life, but really policy should be the first issue to be able to realize them. Not the pilots one. A good policy to have a wider adoption.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
That's fine, I think. Is there any more questions?
No.
Oh, Shay, really, we were extremely pleased to meet you. Extremely pleased to host you. It was our pleasure that you join us tonight. For Turkey, it's tonight. I think there it's the afternoon time. But thank you very much. But this is the first time, but it's not the last time. You have your word, you have a promise, so that during the elections, I just hear say that we will be together with Shay. Especially if I talk personally, I will be together with Shay. And after one day, we will also talk with her as the #1 in PES Global.
Thank you so much, Professor Erding. I greatly appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to visiting you in Istanbul in person sometime soon.
And sometime soon. Yes, I hope we will be very pleased to also host you physically.
Thank you so much.
You will enjoy it.
Yes, of course. Yes. And I appreciate very much the support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Many thanks to our great audience for the participation, for active questions, and not just technically, also asking questions about the PES issues. And if you have any more questions, you can also directly connect with Shay via different platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, and also via the email, so that if you have any questions, you can keep in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Hope to see all of you in the next event of the IEEE PES Turkey chapter right after the summertime. Let's give a break in the summertime. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.